The Maniac moniker was invented in the year 1973 when Latin Disciple gang member Pete the Burner Carrillo was on trial and screamed out that he's a maniac in the courtroom. After this, the Latin Disciples adopted the Maniac as part of their name. However, it was not used as an everyday part of the name, and they continued to tag Latin Disciples on the walls and referred to themselves as Latin Disciples. In the year 1979, Maniac developed a deeper meaning when some mild disagreements began happening between Spanish Cobras and Latin Disciples. This was not a violent disagreement, but instead an agreement to separate within the YLO alliance that bound them together. The establishment of the Insaints and Maniacs in 1979 meant that all gangs very close to either organization became Maniacs or Insaints. However, no one tagged it on the walls or really represented it. It was just there, but not spoken of. For the most part, relations between Maniacs and Insaints was very peaceful throughout the 1980s, with just some minor eruptions every now and then. In the year 1989, Maniacs and Insaints began to have more conflict, mainly just Spanish Cobras and Latin Disciples. This was foreshadowing of the major conflict that was soon to come. In 1991, the conflicts became more frequent between Maniacs and Insaints, and the acts became increasingly violent. However, they were still followed up with peaceful resolutions. In the year 1992, the conflict frequency increased yet again, and now it became time for the North Side Hispanic folk nations to agree to disagree. As I said, Maniac and Insane was nothing new. It was implemented in 1979, but no one represented it to the fullest, not even the nations that created it. Now Maniac and Insane was law, and Maniacs expected their organizations to represent Maniac before their own names, but this wasn't always followed by fellow Maniacs. Those that were already Maniac now were identified openly as Maniacs, such as Latin Jivers, Latin Lovers, YLO Disciples, Latin Stylers, Maniac Campbell Boys, and Milwaukee Kings. This meant that all gangs bound to Maniac had to be prepared to help other Maniac organizations take up arms against Insaints and any others not aligned with Maniac. Between the years 1992 and 1994, flare-ups and temporary wars continued but could be smoothed over as before. However, the time period between peaceful periods became much shorter and hard feelings settled in more. In many areas, Insaints, Maniacs, and Almighties didn't even hang out with each other anymore. In 1994, the Spanish Cobras gunned down a member of the Maniac Latin Disciples, which caused a temporary war and further strained the relationship between Maniacs and Insaints. Even to the point where they hated each other. However, it wasn't permanent war. In the year 1995, a massive disagreement that involved shootings happened between Latin Lovers and MLDs. This caused the Latin Lovers to leave the Maniacs and switch to Insane. The Latin Jivers joined alongside the Lovers and became Insane as well for about 1 year. The Milwaukee Kings broke away from Maniac as well, and the MLDs declared war on all their former allies. In 1996, after the Valentine's Day shootings between the Maniac Latin Disciples and Spanish Cobras, the feelings grew increasingly hardened between Insaints and Maniacs. Even to the point it was a miracle they were still not in full-scale permanent war yet. At this point, periods of peace were far less frequent and weak than periods of war. In 1991, the war became permanent after more murders occurred. There was one last attempt at peace in 1999, but after MLDs started shooting their own members at a peaceful meetup, there were no more attempts at peace, and Insaints and Maniacs were at war.